Welcome everyone to the Hi-Rez Expo 2019 Art of SMITE panel. To my side here we have a cavalcade of amazing talent art-wise from the SMITE team. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
From this end?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Vivian Costi. I am a concept artist for SMITE.
Oh, it works. I'm Anna Renee. I'm a storyboard artist on our cinematic team.
I'm Tim. I'm one of the character riggers on SMITE.
I'm Brock. I'm an animator.
And I'm Chris, and I'm a visual effects artist.
And I'm Ben, and I'm the art director. Okay, so we'll get started. Usually when we do things, we start off with the concept phase. So Vivian, come on down.
Me. Okay, so for the concept phase, so actually,
you want to rock the actual thing, slides?
Yes.
Yes. I don't want to get you too
Throw your groove
fast.
off.
Yeah. Just the musical chairs.
Left and right. Okay, so for concept phase, actually before the concept phase, there's actually a bunch of other things that goes on when it comes to like skins and gods, especially gods. Usually it kicks off with the design team who come up with like a goal of what we kind of want to represent in the visuals or in the personalities. Because usually for the gods, they have done a lot of research, and they also sometimes have an idea of what the possible kits are. And the kits are really important for the concept phase, and I will go through that in a bit. For the skins, it's usually like a planning meeting where everybody get together and think about what kind of things would be really cool to have in the game. And that really includes community as well. Because sometimes the community have like really cool ideas, and we kind of like look at everything together and then pick the best one for whatever patch it is or battle pass. Okay, so the process. This is generally like the standard process. It might not be like the process because sometimes it really depends on the artist and how they like to work. But usually we always start with the research. Even though the design team has researched on like a god, we will still have to do our own research because ours is mostly more visual, as well as like just be more familiar with the character, what the god's gonna be, what their existing lore is, and we'll like take everything together and kind of like organize all the thoughts so that we can create the best look for the god. For skins, we also still do research even though it's a cosmetic item. So for the skins, the research usually have to do with what already exists in the IPs, like other people's IPs, because you don't want to make the same thing they did, because that usually gets into like a legal issue. So that's kind of like not good. But it's really important to know what's out there, right? Because like sometimes people really do think alike, and it's not like you intended to do something, but it's really important to be aware that they exist and you should avoid X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, like by researching that, you know that your theme is actually on point, right? Like sci-fi, what's actually considered sci-fi? It's not just like whatever you think sometimes. The same with like fantasy and things like that. So, because everybody has like different idea of what high fantasy is or like cyberpunk is. So if you do your proper research, like usually your skin will actually look more so like what you intended it to be. So research actually takes a lot, like a big chunk of your time as a concept artist. And the second largest, well, I guess like that's the second largest thing. The most time-consuming part of the process is actually the iteration, which is where you are exploring the different possibilities of what this god or the skin could look like based on your research. So you're taking all the things you've learned from your research period, and then you basically pump out as many ideas as possible within a time limit because we are in a production time and you have to, ship things at certain times. It's not just a personal project where you can kind of just like keep working on it until you're happy. So after those checkpoints, we go to orthos, which is we are talking with the animation and rigging team to see if this will fit onto existing gods or will this work with the kits when it comes to animating. Like for example, if you have a character who has a lot of swinging, you probably won't have a lot of sashes like flowing around because we cannot, we could properly support it because we can maybe fudge it, but it won't look good, and you can't have like the flowing and such, which you kind of want to have. If the orthos pass the tech checkpoint, then it goes to the color pass, which we are just giving them like different color options. When it's come to GOTS, it will be like not just the base color, but also the recolor as well as the masteries now. So the mastery used to be not taken care of by the concept team, but they are at this point. Because you're already working with colors, you might as well just do like the masteries as well, just pitching it out there. And then there will be adjustments during the modeling phase to make it look even better. And then after the color pass, then you have a final product, which we will ship to the 3D artists to use as a blueprint. And that's where they build the models and make it all really pretty. So just an example of the research bit. These are like typically what my boards look like. They're actually like not the biggest ones, but they are ginormous and they have lots of images. And I usually have a lot of them because when I'm collecting them, I'm kind of converting the information I'm seeing into my head, and I'm kind of remembering the bits that I like what kind of shapes I liked, or what kind of colors that I really resonate with for the particular topic. And this is the same for both GOTS as well as skins. So I will always go through and collect all these images. And I may not actually see them all like when I work on it, but by the point I've completed this board, I have remembered a lot of things, I've organized my thoughts. And it's really important for me because then, you know, the personality nodes as well as the look of the character or the skin, they all work together. And then when the voice pack is done, because they also work off of the written notes, the visual matches the voice pack and the splash art. An example of the iteration phase, it's a little different for me when it comes to skins versus GOTS. A lot of times for the GOTS, you don't actually have a specific requirement when it comes to like flowing things or bones or what can come off the character. For the existing GOTS, usually we work off of the existing model because sometimes you have the requirements, like for example, like a tier 3 skin, you will not be changing a lot of the bones. So you have to work within that restriction and make sure everything works well. And you're not, I guess, like adding new animations because usually for tier 3s, you're not getting new ones. Like T4s, you will get some, but T3s, you don't. So you have to think about what tier it is and what you can change and cannot change. And if they have deployables, we also do the same to deployables. Again, and after we go through the initial ideation phase, if we like a certain look or a certain silhouette, we explore further, and then from those, we pick the one that's probably going to be the one, but sometimes there's still more changes as we work. But usually at this point, we make a thing called the orthographic view, which is kind of the blueprint, kind of like you're building a house. What does it look like in the front, the side, maybe the top, just anything that requires construction. You kind of need to know what they look like so that the 3D modeler knows what to model and how they will model it. And it's really important for them to know because sometimes the 2D image look great, but like in 3D, it doesn't work out. So if they know what they're doing when they look at the concept, they can also make judgments of like what to change to make it actually work in game and doesn't just look good in 2D. After the ortho phase, usually at this point, everything has been checked off, so it will pass the animation and rigging. They say like, yeah, we can totally do this. If there's any changes to animation or is there any bones that we're trading, at this point, it's already like talked about and we have agreed upon, you know, what's changing, what's not changing, and what needs to be exactly the same. And at this point, we can go ahead and add the colors to the skin or the god. And then Ben will pick the one that he thinks worked the best. And then once he has made a decision and give me the big green stamp, we finished off the concept, which will include the colors for all the different views. Any parts that might be confusing in the front, side, and back, we do something called a call-out, which is like the tattoos, the tabbers, any like metal bits, armors, anything that moves that might be misinterpreted in the concept. You know, we need to kind of like put it out there. It's kind of like an IKEA furniture call out, like how you're doing this hinge. That way that the 3D artist isn't just guessing the whole time and doing my job as well. And that's really what the concept phase is like. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm filling in for the modeling phase. I used to be a character modeler back in my day. So once Viv is done with the concept stuff, we then will move on to a rough model, basically. This model is going to be Persephone. We're going to go over. It was done by Haley Zhu, one of our fantastic character artists. So the rough phase, you're basically going in and you make some geometry there, and you try to make sure you get enough deformation cuts in there and enough breakup for the silhouette to be readable, and then making sure that also goes in line with what the rigging department would need so they can move forward with their side of things. Tim will talk more on that whenever he gets to his slide on rigging. So from the rough, once we get that approved from rigging, we start moving off to a high poly model. And there will be a numerous, this is the bulk of your work, basically. Our production timelines for a character model are usually about 5 weeks. So the first week is your rough, 2 weeks will be dedicated to the high poly progress, and then 1 week is for your low poly and UVing, and the final week is for textures and materials. So the high poly is the big meat and potatoes of this stuff. You're doing a high fidelity model that's going to be millions of polygons, and the intent is to take this and put those millions of polygons worth of detail onto a lower game ready mesh. So this is like the first phase where they're going over basically the anatomy of the character and taking the rough block out from before and like starting to refine that. Here's another stage of it where we start to have some colors for, we use a program called ZBrush for our high poly modeling. And you have this stuff called polypaint, which is adding colors to it. So the top is the colors applied to a gray model, which is the bottom. So this would be like around a week and a half worth in. And then by the time you get done with the 2 weeks, you have a final model that's a very high fidelity model, and it's made of millions of polygons that we now have to put onto a lower poly model. So once you have the high, we'll then go through and start working on the low. So it's for the character process, just to cover this, Viv was talking about like having the design department do some changes and iteration. On GODS, that happens a lot, and generally by the time we've gotten to the modeling phase, we don't have to do a lot of work other than just take Viv's IKEA blueprints and just build these things. But sometimes a little bit back and forth that happens during the progress. If late in the game designs like this skin character, the ability they have, is maybe unbalanced and they have to change the specs on it, we may have to make some adjustments around this phase to accommodate for that. So this is the low poly model. After we've gotten the high done, we then retopologize over a low poly model, or over the high to make this low. And you can see here there's lots of wires, but it's like, you know, this clear reed in between it. They're like little polygons. What you want to get for an in-game model for SMITE, our restrictions are about 17,500 polygons. So basically, that model that you saw here is made of like millions, and what we have to do now is make that work on a smaller, more manageable mesh for the computer to handle. In real time, you can't do millions. You can only do like, I think around these days, it's probably like 20,000 to 60,000 you can get into, but with SMITE, we try to like make sure we accommodate lower end PCs as well as higher end ones. So once we have that done, we then take these little squares here, we're gonna unwrap it, right? So I guess the best way to describe what unwrapping is like a Campbell's soup can, like it's a cylinder shape, but the wrapper on the soup can is actually a flat piece of paper that gets wrapped around a cylinder. So here I selected basically her face and skin parts, and you can see the face is kind of this, this weird, no, my mouse doesn't work. To the left, there's like kind of a half face kind of thing. It looks really, really creepy, like a leather head mask or something like that. That is the face unwrapped, and you can see from here, it's like these polygons to the right, there's like a face model. You can kind of see that area where it's not selected, and here it's selected. So what we do is unwrap these as flat as we can make them with as little distortion as possible so we can start texturing. So in between this phase, there is a baking phase. So we'll take the high poly model details from this after we have the UVs done from the low poly, and then we'll bake the details from normal maps and whatnot onto texture maps here. So here is an example of most of the maps that go into making a character on SMITE, depending on their abilities and if they're kind of being a character like Soul that's more got effects going through her, you'll have more masks. At the bottom right, you can see that. The diffuse is your main colors. It's basically just anything that is going to be painted on there that's going to give all the detail and what the hue and saturation and all the values that are on the skin. The normal map is this one in blue here, this little, it's like a really light blue skin. This thing is just giving you computational data. Basically, all that detail from the high poly gets baked down into 3 different maps based on the axis. I think the X is left and right. The Y, so RGB is going to be X, Y, Z basically. R is a red channel, G is a green channel, blue is the blue channel. And all those different channels, you get different data based on like where it is in the space in the game. So the X is left and right, that's going to be your R. The G is up and down, that's your Y. And then the Z is your depth. You don't really get much out of that. But it creates this map that looks blue. So if you break it down into each individual channel, you get like a left and right, up and down kind of black and white kind of thing, which gives you the blue. That is really important. That gets you where you get all the detail from your high poly model onto this low poly model. Then you have a specular map. This is kind of what the things that shine look like. You're going to have like gems, metals, things that are more like flesh. They're a little more matte. Cloth is going to be a lot more matte, less specularity. Then these other masks down here are a combination of multiple things. This first one in red, you can see like there's kind of like these little stickers that are the flowers that are happening. Those are like it's like an alpha channel. There's probably a gloss map. We do a combination of multiple types of maps to achieve a lot of different material looks. Here I wanted to show the different sizes. 2048 is your largest size. Then you have different sizes based on how much maps you have to make, and then how much texture. Basically, we have a limited resource count. So you kind of try to do like 512s are like not the best looking, but you can get away with having them in smaller maps. So 2048 basically holds 4 1024s, and a 1024 holds 4 512s. So based on what's important and what we need to have for resource budgets, we'll make some smaller and make other ones bigger based on how important they are. So once we have the textures done, we then go into Material Editor. Okay, I don't know if you guys can read this bottom left thing, but it's a bunch of these nodes. There's these little slots that arrows are going into. We take advantage of all these, are diffuse power, emissives. Instead of going into all these, they just kind of basically give you a combination of things that make it look like different real-life materials. On the right side, you can see a node network that is a combination of multiple things, basically allowing you to have emissives where it glows. You have reflections, like in the metals, different intensities on the reflections, like on specularity, to make it feel like, is it plastic or is it like metal? All that is done in this node editor on the right here. And then when we're done, the final materials look something like this. So we go from this model back here that has nothing and is plain in gray, taking all this color data and mask information and normal map data, and then pipe it through the material editor, and then we get this kind of combination of things. I was going to go over the skin pipeline. It's the same thing, basically. The only thing to take into consideration is making sure that you have your model still ride the same rig, which Tim will go over in just a second. But yeah, so the whole process is pretty much the same for the character modeling side. You make a thing, and that thing gets all textured and nice and neat for the game. So on to the rigging phase.
All right, so rigging phase. What is rigging? Simply put, we are in charge of building the skeletal system that goes inside of our 3D models from our modeling team. It gets way more complex than that, but that is as simple as that can probably be said. So when we start a new god, we always start with a rough high poly mesh. That's like the first iteration that modeling will send us. And then from there, we will begin to build out the skeletal system, which you can kind of see that weird green and blue guy down there. That's what our skeletal system looks like. And that's what's actually being put inside of our empty 3D modeled characters. One of the early steps that we probably do first is build a bone count. Our engine has a limit on what we're allowed to do. So all of our characters typically cap at about 75 bones. We have opportunities to go past that, but it's more expensive for us on the engine side. So we can go further and push it further, but we usually, for purposes of making it run smoother, we like to try to stay within that limit as often as possible. So once we get a bone count going, we get the skeleton built into our model, we will get a rough skin, so we'll actually put influence onto that mesh, and we can start to see how well the proportions of this character are going to work. That's a big thing that we deal with, is making sure proportions feel good and look right. So we'll have a lot of back and forth with modeling and concept to make sure we're getting proportions that feel really nice for our character. And also benefit the rigging team so we can actually get nice deformations and make the character as appealing as possible. So once we have that initial rough mesh and we get it all weighted and set up with our skeletal system, and we get that approved, we will move on to our low poly final mesh. And from here, this is that final mesh Ben was talking about. So this is like our phase 2 of meshes that we receive. And once we get the base skeleton set in, we actually start adding secondaries to our meshes. Secondaries are any controls that don't ride the original skeletal system. So you're talking ponytails or tassels or tabards, necklaces, anything that may dangle around on the character. So those get set in play once we get our initial skeleton set down. Once that gets finished, we usually send the character off to animation, and they start doing early animation tests for us. And this also can kind of help dictate which direction we want to go with our model, if certain things are still feeling good or not feeling good. A lot of our characters have trouble like pretty common trouble areas. So the pelvis and thigh area can cause us a lot of problems because we don't necessarily have the bones to support that area. So once animation gets something, they start moving it around, and say there's like this belt that is like going across your pelvis diagonally, and half of it is hanging on top of the thigh. Sometimes that can cause a lot of issues for us, so sometimes we'll actually do a redesign to kind of help that area out, or maybe shift it higher or angle it differently, so we can get it working best for everybody. So once we kind of get that face finished, we'll actually move on to the face of our character. Faces usually get put in towards the end because I think they're a little easier to shift for us, I guess, to kind of move around. But once we get that done, we actually start kind of evaluating what the topology of the face looks like. So one big thing that we look for is having concentric circles. So this is a continuous edge flow that creates a perfect circle around the eye sockets or around the mouth. This allows us to get better deformation with our blinks and our jaw open and things of that nature. Just a lot more friendly for us. So then we will get our control laid out, so we'll get our eyes in there, we'll get our blink bones, we'll get our eyebrow bones. I think our face consists of about 28 bones or so, so we have a pretty decent amount in there. It's not very often that you will get all of those bones in-game, though, because of that 75 bone limit that we have. So once we start breaching that 75 bone limit, we will start taking bones away from the character to make it run smoother for our game. So deployables are essentially handled in the same way as a new god. You can kind of see here, so these are all of Persephone's deployables. You have her plant, her little skelly guy, and then her ultimate mesh. You can kind of see, based off these images here, how complex some of the rigs can get for these deployables. So you can see the plant there has a heck of a lot of controls going on there. The skeleton, I mean, these guys are basically gods as well, right? They're brand new characters. They're getting a whole skeletal system, just like our base gods do. But then you can also see here on the deployable mesh, which is that dark plant thing there, you know, there's only one bone that runs that whole thing. So in cases like some of them, like I said, some of them are super simple to do, just one bone, done, moving on. Some have it's a whole character basically, right? So some can be very complex, some are very simple. So that's kind of the process for our new gods. We pretty much iterate that same process for every new god that we get. Some gods are a lot more complex and difficult than other gods. Some gods we get really lucky or have really good pre-planning from concept and modeling to make it work really well for us. But then if we do a god that's kind of like, we haven't done this kind of god before, it can be a little more challenging. So like for Jormungandr, for example, I worked on him and we did a lot of changes, and I probably rigged that guy like 6 different times. So it can shift depending on what we're kind of getting through the pipe. So for new skins, it's a little different, but it's not as involved as a new god is, which is nice. So we'll initially get a rough mesh. We like our rough meshes to be, I think Viv was kind of mentioning this earlier, matching silhouettes with the base character or base god. So making sure silhouettes match really helps us down the pipe to move a little quicker, be a little more efficient with what we're doing. So you can kind of see the second image there is a big mess, but that's the base god and the new skin kind of overlaid on top of each other. So you can kind of see how close those boundaries are within each other. And then, so once we get the rough mesh, we will weight it to the base god. So weighting, I guess I'll kind of explain that really quick. So part of our job is actually attaching the mesh to the bones that we build. And we do that by a process called painting weights. So you have to imagine these characters are made up of polygons, and all of the polygons have vertices. So we are actually touching every single vertice on these meshes and adding influence to these. The influence that we're adding to these are allowing for realistic deformation in what your guy is doing, right? So it's a very tedious job to go through and make things look as real as possible, right? So once we weight the new rough mesh to the base god, we will go through this process called penetration audits. So this is a process that we go through where, and I have some test examples here where you can kind of see the base god had no hat, right? So we have no bone support for the hat. She has these ponytails that come over her shoulder. She has this front apron. She has some new things around her waist, on her belt, like the satchel. So you can see in these animations how those are static. So there's no flop to the hat. The satchel on her side's not bouncing around or anything like that. So we do this penetration audit to see where the troubled areas are and where we may need to add new bones to the skin. So you can see in that third animation there, her arms are just hanging through her hat. So that's obviously an issue, so we need to put some bones in the hat. And then once we get that stuff figured out, we then will have the animation team do their thing and get it out of the way or do an override and make things not clip with each other. Which is also why we have these all colored in crazy colors, so it's easier for us to visually see what's going on. So once we go through that penetration audit, we figure out what new bones we need to add to this mesh. We'll receive the final mesh from the modeling team. So similar to new gods, we're going to take the rough mesh once it's been approved, and we're going to evaluate the mesh, make sure it's still within the bounds of what we expected. Sometimes final meshes can change from the rough mesh, which is okay. And if that does happen, we still have to just make sure that those changes are still working in our favor. Sometimes they will be a little experimental, which I think is great, and it can give us something better, but sometimes those experimental changes don't necessarily work for us, so sometimes we will revert back to what it was before. So then we're gonna finally actually start adding the secondaries to our new skin mesh and get those prepped and set up for our animation team to do what they need to with it. The deployables for new skins are handled in the same way as the God skin. Sometimes we don't need to. The goal is essentially to build as few new bones as possible, right? If we can make things ride pre-existing rigs, we're in good shape. So for example, you can see here on the sunflower, the plant here, the only new bone that we had to add was a little one to the hat that's underneath. So everything else rode the previous rig, and it looked great, which is a big win for us. And you can see on the skeleton over to the scarecrow, we only had to put a few for like the hat and his head. And obviously for the ultimate mesh, no changes were made there, so it could just ride the pre-existing, which is awesome for us. Kind of wraps up what rigging does.
All right. So animation is taking these guys' hard work and making it come to life. So me and my team are responsible for the personality, deciding what attacks are going to look like, just general overall tone of who the character is. So I'll go into how we came up with Persephone and her personality. So to start off, we do a lot of research, go into the lore of who they are. Maybe like a character did something specific. King Arthur, for example, like pulled or got the sword from the lake, or I don't know, something like that. We try to like take that stuff that we find in the lore and implement in their animations sometimes. I know Oleron's like wave, he does it like how they would in the Yoruba culture. So we look into that account. But every god we have has an anim sheet, and you can see this is all that we have to do for every single god. This is for Persephone. So like the laugh, the taunt, wave, the run cycles, we have 8 directions. We divvy it up between the teams. So it's not just one person working on the whole god. We have about 13 animators, and we divvy it up. So when we first get a new god, we get the rig, and it's a blank slate, A pose. They're not doing anything, have no expression. And so everyone on our team will go and say, okay, I think that she should stand like this or this. And so out of those poses, we go and we narrow them down and vote what we think best fits the character. So these are a few examples of ones that we liked of how her idol could have looked like. So we ended up with this one pose, and then we added animation. So the idol pose is what every single animation is built off of, unless it's like a stun or a loop. So this is like very important to us. We need to nail this down at first, because everything will come from this. So when we have to start a new animation, we first begin with a rough pass or a blocking pass, and it's not about making it look pretty or anything. It's just getting the key ideas of what we want. So I animated this taunt, and it started off with, I really wanted her to like crush one of her skulls and point at you and make her feel menacing. And I showed it to my team, and they gave me some notes. And so it kind of turned into this, where the stomp was more forceful and the point was more purposeful. And as we're going through this, I'm trying to like push poses and make them more dynamic and cleaning up arcs and stuff like that. And then, so this is like a more polished, like the timing's a little bit better, the poses are better, and just like the overall feeling. So when we're working, we don't touch any of the secondary. You can see like I turned off her hair and her little skirt tassels, just so I can focus on the body itself, because that's really important. And then after that's all done, and we get the, if you go back to the sheet, like we can see, there's the rough, first, final, secondary. Like we go in that order to have those improved, and once those are greenlit, we get to move on to the second, or the next step. So once that was done, I cleaned it up some more, and I added like the flowing bits of her hair and her skirt, and just kind of brought it all together. So when we get this, when there's a new skin, like Tim was kind of saying, was that they add new parts to the rig. So her hair is new, and their hat and the bags on their sides are all new. So we have to go back for new skins, and every single animation we have to touch up on those and give those life as well. And I just wanted to say, like, a lot of the times these animations do go through a lot of iterations. So I just thought it was interesting to show you, like, the top left one is like what I initially wanted Persephone's ult to be. We kind of wanted like her like to be a dancer-y kind of person. A lot of our animations are very flowy and like graceful. I showed that to my team and they thought it was too much, so I went to the one on the right of that, try to spin it, and then I ended up with the last one where it's just like she spins and then throws it. And that, it also has to like read in game, because I know if you see the top left one from the back, like you don't really see her legs kicking out like you do from the side, from this view. So a lot of our animations are based towards the camera, so you guys can see like the great poses that we try to make. But yeah, that's it.
Hi. Okay, yeah, so this is a visual effect of SMITE. When we're designing a new god, there's like the designer will pick an ability and they'll write out all this stuff on the, I guess it's the left-hand side of the screen. And they'll give it like very specific details. They'll say like, you know, the cooldown, all this stuff. They'll say like what they want it to do. And then it's our job as the artist to decide how can we properly convey that information in a visually appealing, but also like gameplay relevant way. So there's like, you know, 3 kind of steps here. You know, you start out broad, so you kind of add some basic shapes to it, maybe some basic colors and flows. And then after that, you kind of figure out what we're missing with it to make it like better, to like, make it read better. And then after that is the fun phase where you get to like fluff it up and you get to add like new things and add a bit of shine to it. So example of this is Persephone's in-hands. If I was smart, I would have angled the camera down so that you could see that the in-hand was just one of our standard projectiles where it was off the ground and she's throwing it. And this contains like some good stuff, right? It contains the colors that we want. The theming is there. It has like leaves and it has some like little wispy vine trails flowing off the back. But it's not like interesting, I guess. It was kind of just a standard projectile. And so I think animation actually came up to me and was like, hey, you know, can we do something a little more interesting? We want her to kind of, we want them to be ground-based, kind of like Vulcan's projectiles. So I was like, okay, you know, I can take a look at that. And they're like, we want kind of a plant to just go through the ground. I was like, okay, well, we'll give it a try. So this is what we got next. And it's not great. So the whole thing is that there's a lot of iteration in our processes. And this is where we end up on the second iteration, where we just have this kind of static plant claw thing, and it's just traveling through the ground. And it leaves like a trail, and it has like things that we're looking for, right? It has like the color, it has the theming, things like that, but it's just, it looks weird. So we had the idea of what we wanted, but we wanted it to be better. So it kind of went on to like the fluff it up stage. And so I thought like maybe if we added like vines flowing behind it, like more upward motion, things like that. And then we ended up with her projectile and how it is today. So we have like, instead of having the claw just going forward, we have like a rolling motion in the claw, like the vines are rolling forward. We have vines that trail behind it, leaving a bunch of like smoke and leaves. And then when it hits the impact, we have like a claw made of vines that like pops up and is spooky. So this is better, right? Everything is still there, the theming, the color. It has really good, like, you know, motion to it. It looks very interesting, and it works. So that's kind of how we arrived at that conclusion. The next part of our kind of process when we're working on a new god, or skins in general, just every process, is optimization. And like I said, this is the boring part, and I hate it. But you have to do it to make sure that it runs on people's computers. So there are several ways that we go about it. We do LODs, which is an abbreviation for level of detail. And a level of detail is basically, it tells you at like certain ranges, we scale back what you see. So let's say you spawn like 100 particles when the explosion goes off right next to you. Well, like, 10,000, or let's say 10,000 units away, you're not really going to notice all those particles, so we probably don't need to spawn 100 particles. Maybe instead at that LOD, we'll spawn like 20 particles or something like that. So we trim it back little by little as you go further away, and it's also influenced by the settings in the game. So there's a setting called particle detail, and as you turn it down, it cycles down the LODs. Don't do that, though. Always leave it on maximum, because that's where it belongs. There are other places like the shader complexity, I'll get into that in a second, and then bounding boxes. So the engine is actually really quite clever. So we give all of our effects these things called bounding boxes, and it's just a box, and the effect itself is contained within this box. And what it says is that if you cannot see one of the edges of this box, it does not draw that effect. So if there's like an explosion that's happening on the other side of the wall, like in the Conquest map, if we didn't have a bounding box there, that effect would just always be called. It would always be rendered, even if you don't see it. So what this says is like, hey, the player can't see this, don't draw it. And it kind of just helps people's computers run a little better. So this is shader complexity. We have a command in our engine that allows us to view our particles in a shader complexity, like I said. And so what you need to know is that green means there's basically nothing there. And then as it gets further into red, it tells you that there's definitely stuff going on. And green and red is good. Pink gets a little scary. And then when it gets hot white, that's not good. That means it's very expensive, and people's computers are probably going to have some issues. So this is sorry, in the last slide, this is what we're working with. This is Persephone's second ability. If you don't know, she plants a seed. After some time, the seed blooms, and when she hits it, it explodes. This is what it looks like in shader complexity. The one on the left is what it looks like in-game. The one on the right, I took everything and just turned it up to 11, and it's not great. So basically, it's just, shader complexity is like the more you have laying on top of itself, or like the more particles you have laying on top of each other, the more expensive it becomes. So if you even if you have just like a particle that's like 4 instructions, like really nothing, if you layer like 500 of that thing like right on top of each other, it's not going to be great. And again, people's computers won't be happy. So the other part of our job, and the vast majority of our job, is actually skinning. The way our workflow works is we generally have one person that works on a god, and everyone else is kind of working on skins or like environment, things like that. But skins are the majority of our job, and it's like a lot of fun. So there are a few things that we need to keep in mind when we're doing this. Sorry. The visuals have to kind of like, of the abilities need to match with whatever the concept artist and the modeling team have come up with her, or with whatever skin we're working on. So, if it's a sci-fi skin, a high-tech skin, our effects need to probably be high-tech and sci-fi. Another important part is making players feel stylish and powerful when they use their abilities. If you use an ability and you don't feel the impact of it, it's a boring ability, and it doesn't feel good to use. Like, even if you don't like cognitively realize that the ability doesn't feel good and impactful, subconsciously you start to realize it doesn't feel great. The brain's just good at that. And then it's got to be fun to see and look at. And then it also has to resemble the base effects. So, if Discordia's second ability is this like cubular little ground thing, and obviously we can't take that cubular thing and make it like a triangle or a circle or something like that. It always has to match gameplay relevant areas. So here's some examples of like the visual effects skinning that we do. It's just Daji on her ninja skin. So you can see there's the base Daji when she has her like fiery hands. And it's all pretty simple. The effects artist that originally worked on Daji was very good at like cartoony, simplistic art styles. So it's always interesting to see different artists taking different art styles and then kind of like taking their own take on it. So this is my take on it. It's still kind of cartoony, but we'll see that more. So this is her second ability, where she does 3 slashes. So as you can see, very simple shapes. It's still good looking. It's just kind of a different art style. Now, when I change the slide, you're going to notice that something changes. If you said the visual effects, you're correct. The visual effects did change. They're still stylish, and that's good. If you said the gray box that's supposed to fit snugly behind the GIF got much larger, you're also right, and that's because graphic design is my passion. Yeah, so just changing up elements. We had this like cool, I always liked the smoke from like Hercules, I think it was, the Disney movie, or Mulan or whatever, where it was like this kind of cartoony, swirly smoke. So I tried to somewhat replicate that. I think it came out pretty well. There's her teleport. We can also do different things for different skins, like if something is really necessary. So on base.g, you can see it. You can see a little bit if you look on the left. When she teleports to someone, it draws like a trail of after images of her to her target. And that's cool, it works for her. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a trail like go up in the air and then like spiral down around whoever she does hit. And you can kind of see that on the right as the trail comes down and loops around them. So if we have extra time, we like to add like cool, like just not improvements, but cool little neat additions to skins, as long as they don't like break the game, obviously. And here's her powwow, and it's kind of just the same thing, you know, taking what someone else has done and then doing my own kind of spin on it while still fitting within the concept and theming of the skin itself. So after this, I think it's cinematics. Annie?
Hello. So cinematics is, we're not part of the SMITE team. We're from Alacrity Art House. And I'm the storyboard artist on the team. We have a whole bunch of people that we gather together to create our cinematics. I'm going to talk about Persephone in theme with the panel today. So our process is usually we start with a script. Either someone on our team writes it, or someone from SMITE will give us an idea that they have, and then either they write a script or we'll write off their idea. After we get a script together, we go to storyboarding, we create an animatic, we do some visual development, you know, just like usually our videos take place in a totally different area that's not in like, we don't usually take like maps from SMITE or anything like that. We usually kind of make our own thing. Sometimes we'll take elements from SMITE, but usually we're trying to branch off and do like more ambitious stuff, I guess. So after visual development, we do like 3D blocking, and then we go into final, which includes like lighting and visual effects and stuff. Oh, and what do you call it? Pre-comp. No, sorry, never mind. So for storyboards, this is what I initially did. I don't know if I'll play this Persephone video later, but we have her like picking a pomegranate. Camera follows, she sniffs it, camera keeps tracking as she like plucks it open. Then I turn that into an animatic. So here's like the same shot, but now in animatic format. I usually use Storyboard Pro when I'm creating my storyboards. It's pretty much the best program to use when you're doing storyboarding. Then we go on to VizDev, and then this is like a mood board of how we wanted there's a tree in the beginning of the video, and we were kind of deciding like how we want that tree to look like. The tree is like, it's like really vibrant at first, but then it gets like kind of gloomy and dark. So we were trying to figure out like how do we want like the bright, visually beautiful tree to look like. And then we have some stuff here where I think our intern did these. We were trying to figure out how we wanted the vines to look for the pomegranate. These are a little bit more stylized than how we originally, like how the video looks now, but it really helped our environment artists when they were trying to, you know, model out the models. Here's some more VizDev stuff of the tree. Originally, the tree was going to look very like extreme perspective sort of thing, but this is how it originally ended up looking like at the end. And we also do a color script. Color scripting is really, really important for like the lighting artists and stuff, because we don't want them like shooting in the dark, trying to figure out like, oh, what is the atmosphere of this scene like? So we usually get an artist from Alacrity. Nargis did this, and she'll usually paint over my storyboards trying to figure out the mood and the atmosphere of the video. We have Persephone like in a dark, well, she's in hell, so she's in like a cave. So we wanted like embers, like some kind of sulfuric fog coming up and stuff. And then she has like notes telling us like, hey, this is what I was thinking. This is what I think the video should look like. Then we do animation blocking. Usually when we're making these videos, the model and the rigging and everything these guys talked about, that's being made alongside, so we don't always have the model. So here we used Hera as a base when we were blocking out the video. And then once we get the Persephone model, then we put her into the video. But right now we used Hera for until Persephone was ready. And when we do get the final model, we'll usually, because this is a close-up shot, we'll usually have some of our artists like update the textures a bit. Since we're so close on her, we kind of up that a bit, and we ask permission from the team first, and they're pretty cool about it, so that's good. And then we have the final. So I think this is I don't know if this video will play. Oh, it's playing.
Every season has its ending.
There's sound.
The leaves.
But this is
fall
just
from
a
the
mixture of the
trees.
animatic and the final.
Once more,
so you can see how much
I
it
descend
changed.
to my husband's kingdom. The gods claim it is a place of shadows and sadness. But what do the gods know of death?
Sometimes the timing will
What
change
do they know of me?
as we progress through the animation, but it's pretty, this one came out almost 1-to-1. And when we move it to 3D, like, because we're in a 3D space, we can accurately, like, make
They
the
never
shots look a
wondered
little more
why
interesting.
I ate
Like,
the
a good example would be this shot here. There's more of a Dutch angle
had
going
my
on, where in my original boards, it was a little bit more flat. But the same basic idea is there. Like, Persephone's here, Pomegranate's in the foreground, and Cerberus was in the background. So as long as that same basic idea is there, like, that's enough for the animators and for the whole team to work off of. So that's pretty much the cinematic process from script to final. Oh, and I mean, there's a lot more that goes into it because we also have lighting artists, we have visual effects artists, we have After Effects artists that put everything together. So it's like a huge process, but that's like kind of the simple like explanation of how it gets done. That's it. That's it.
Every season has its ending.
Nope.
I think there was another slide after this. But
Oh, there we go. Yeah. And I guess we're opening it up to questions now.
There's a mic right here.
Someone have,
You can also like,
well, I can just run around to people.
okay, well, or you can come up here and do
I'm
that.
going to start right here. I'll work up to you.
So for like, if you're interested in going into like game art as a career, what would you kind of like recommend for something like concept arting? Like what classes you should look for or to take?
Really depends on where you are at the moment. So if you are a high school student or younger, or even in college, I highly recommend a atelier, which is a traditional art school, to build up your foundations first. Because I think a lot of designers, they're already very good at art, like foundation-wise, but a lot of artists are not as good at problem solving, which is what design is like. Especially in terms of like making things for video games. You're technically creating a commercial product, which is solving a problem, right? How can you get people to want to buy a game or to buy the cosmetic item? How can you sell this thing to the public? So by going to school for foundations, it'll allow you to kind of present your ideas properly, to communicate with everyone, especially like if you're working with 3D people, they really need to know what you're drawing, and like they have to be able to figure out like how does thing look in 3D, but from your 2D image. So I think that's really important for one, but also like make sure that you're always exploring everything in the world, because everything you look at, anything you enjoy, like media-wise, it kind of builds your design, like not design library, but
Visual
like,
library.
Yeah, visual library. Because once you're familiar with it, it's a lot easier for you to design things, because you don't have to like research as much if you're familiar with something. Like, for example, if you're into fashion, like the number of dresses you've seen in your life. You can just pull it out because you know exactly what it looks like.
Are you looking just specifically 2D or 3D as well?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay, cool. I think they're hand in hand. Like 2D is like a different skill set, but you use the same kind of like when you're doing conceptual stuff, you can do that in 3D as well. I think to this point, fundamentals are everything. Like you always can go back to the fundamentals and you can learn stuff, even if you've done this for years. So getting that on point, all the other flashy stuff, like making awesome concepts and stuff, that's all visual library you get over time. But getting your foundations right, that's the most important thing. If you have like awesome looking stuff, but your foundations are bad and you're disguising it by having all this like cool stuff, jingling the keys over here, people can see it a mile away that the foundations are wrong and they'll dock you on that.
Yeah, and to Ben's point, you should always explore 3D because in a lot of companies nowadays, 3D makes you a lot faster. So it's also about like efficiency as well. So if you, I guess like, I know some people don't like 3D, but you should at least explore it and see if that is something that you enjoy. Because having that really makes you really powerful because you can also solve a lot of problems they might have like in 3D because you're like, hey, I already blocked it out in 3D, like look at it, can you use that?
Knowing the teams that are lateral to you, like, you know, having done modeling and stuff, I have some concepting abilities. I'm nowhere near as good as Viv over here. But I understand what she's going for, and I can, like, riff off things, too. But to that point, I also know where rigging's at, and I know their limitations from the modeling side. So knowing kind of a little bit of that fundamental stuff for other departments, too, does help. Making everyone do the work for you, Zach?
For the rigging process, is that any more or less difficult for the non-humanoid characters?
I don't know if I necessarily look at it as like from a humanoid to like say a creature, as far as what's going to be difficult. I think probably the more important question is what does the animation team need this guy to do, right? It can be a creature, but maybe he's just sitting there, like, or standing there, and then they just need him to sit in a shot, right? In that case, it's something super basic and simple. Now, realistically, traditionally, quadrupeds and creatures, things of that nature, are a lot more difficult to deal with because they require. So like if they just require more complexity to them, and they have a lot more that is just, I guess, more advanced when it comes to the topology and things of that nature. So for example, Cerberus in our game is a very crazy four-legged, three-headed animal, right? So something like that is, it's not often that we will have a two-legged character, a biped, have 5 heads, right? So naturally, humanoids are a lot simpler to deal with in general.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess throughout the entire process, what kind of, what did Jormungandr introduce as far as like differences for maybe rigging or animation? Specifically because he comes out of the ground as his base model, and then also when he ults, not only does he get bigger, but he has that interaction where he can jump over parts of the map, right? And he has to come down, you know, essentially through parts of the jungle.
I'll start on this, and then I'll pass it. There's probably a lot of people up here that have something to say about that. Like I said earlier, I rigged Jormungandr, and I probably rigged him 5 or 6 different times.
He's never been the same since.
I know. And he has, and he changes every time. But originally, so we've never had a character to that scale, right? I mean, he's this much taller than everyone else in the game. So that alone is a big thing that we have to tackle, right? Where's our camera going to sit? Is it going to be off to the side? Do we need to put it way higher so we can see over him while he's casting his abilities? Things of that nature. How is animation going to handle a camera height that's that tall, right? And animating around that. I know from a rigging standpoint, specifically, we tried a handful of techniques based off of early ideas for this guy. Originally, we were actually going to have him sitting out of the ground, but also have a trail of like 2 or 3 body sections behind him. So that was the very first idea that we ever had. So now, initially, we have to think of, all right, how can we set up this rig file that's going to support this big snake sticking out of the ground, and then also have these 2 tails that trail behind him that look good. So originally we had a rig file of just the snake head with a big section of his body, and then we had another rig file of just a body section that we would essentially put in the game twice and have animation kind of pose it behind him and have that track as he moves. Very quickly we realized that that was just going to be very difficult to deal with, so we trashed that pretty quick. And then from there, we iterated more. It's like, okay, well, for his ultimate, for example, how in the world are we going to make this guy look even bigger when he's already so big? So we actually ultimately ended up having modeling and programming kind of tackle that for us. So rigging, the rigging team essentially removed Yorm's head section from his body and set that up in a separate rig file where it was scaled like 400%. And then modeling gave us a little body section with a bone in it that we could basically have programmed tile repeatedly for us, right? So programming actually programmatically built and generated this body section over and over and over and over and over until it created that big arc that we were looking for. And luckily, the modeling team supports having that repeatable body, which is a whole thing in and of itself. If you want to cover that.
Yeah. So the big thing is kind of gameplay, right? Obviously, isn't more important than anything. But then this is like the world serpent, right? It's the biggest thing. He's supposed to wrap around the world. Like, how do you convey that in a game where you have limitations, right? Like, you can't have him coming in and he's just like the size as he is in God of War, and he's just like, everyone's so small compared to him. So gameplay, like, there was a lot of back and forth. Like, to Tim's point, we had like the trail of snake parts going essentially in the ground to make them feel longer. We just kind of hid the rest of it underground. Well, that didn't really work well, because how do you, as he's moving forward, how do you interpolate the orientation of that tail, right? How does that work? Is there going to be penetration problems? Like, if my body is this part of the snake and there's these little kind of humps that are the rest of his body, if I'm walking behind him, I can hide in his mesh, right? There's no collision. So that is a big problem where we had to be like, how do we make this guy still work and still feel impressive? But we can't do that because it has so many limitations now, right? So the idea was we make him as large as we can within that bounding box vertically, but we had to pull up the camera back. Like, he has a different camera than everyone else. Like, we got him as big as we could without it being as detrimental as possible to a new player. But then you had to think also about skinning moving forward. How do we skin this guy? Like, what kind of things can you add? Because most of his stuff goes into just like a cylindrical body. You can't do too much with that, right? We have a skin coming out pretty soon that explores more than just the cylindrical body. I'm not going to say any more on that, but we're trying new things to kind of get outside the box with him. But the alt was a whole thing in itself. We had to what Tim was saying with the programming, they had to have a spline, so it's kind of this little arc and pathway that you have basically a mesh head attached to that, and then the spline, it interpolates different body parts, like a tileable chunk of body that just keeps getting tiled, and it goes multiple times. So it's all done through the programming. So Yorm is probably one of the hardest things we've ever had to work on, just because how do we stay true to what it's supposed to be, but then how do we functionally make it work? And we're using Unreal 3, so it's a good engine. It's a good engine, but it's like a 10-year-old engine. So we're doing a lot of good stuff with that, but we don't have some of the things that Unreal 4 might give us that makes it a little bit easier. So very challenging.
So earlier you said that you start off with a rough base mesh, and then you use that to concept off of and iterate off of in order to get the general shape, and then you move on to a high poly. Do you use the same rough mesh into the high poly, or do you rebuild the mesh in the high poly using basic shapes? That's
a good question. If you're smart and you want to save time, you don't want to work all night, you try to reuse as much as possible. A lot of people that come into the industry, they're their attitude is, I was an artist at a school, and it's all about your portfolio, and building your portfolio, and you make everything, and it's all pride-based, and I'm the best at my school, my best portfolio. When you go into the industry, you have to understand that, yes, you want to make the best stuff available. Like, you got drafted because you're innate talent. Like, it's almost like sports or something like that. But when you're there, you're doing a job, and efficiency is, you want to match efficiency with the look, right, fidelity. So if you have, like, basically that Persephone you saw, right? So there was the cute cultivator one, and there was the base. So the skin actually was less work than the original one, right? Because you're taking away a lot of stuff. It's the hat, and then it's basically just like a girl wearing overalls, right? So what you could have done if you were trying to be efficient and smart is you would have looked at the original Persephone, even the final model, to save them time. Because you can grab the final model as your rough, what works, like in the body shape, you would use that. That would give them a leg up because they can just transfer the weighting 1-to-1 from the old Persephone over to the new rough, basically. So being smart like that is really good thing to do, because not only does it affect you, the artist working on it, you also affect your team right next to you that he gets a win now because you just like made sure it rid everything, you know? And then animation doesn't have to do extra stuff as much because that stuff all rid pretty well. If you start going outside the box and changing things, one, it's a lot more work for you, especially if it's not really worth doing because it isn't adding to the skin. Two, it just could mess up everybody in the pipeline after you. So yeah, you should reuse where you can, definitely.
I want to touch up on that for concept people.
Triggered.
No, you should work off of existing characters when you do skins as well, because a lot of times, as Ben have said, like, it saves people a lot of time, and you use the base skin because there's already bones in the base skin, and you know exactly where tabards are, you know where like the
Joint
arms
locations,
are.
yep.
Yeah, all the things that are floating around the character. So if you use that as the base, it saves you time, and also it give people the idea like what this character would look like in-game in that skin. Like the feeling would change sometimes because once you model it to the proper proportions, it could be completely different if you drew it different. So sometimes like 2D art looks fantastic or like it's really well rendered, but when you model it to the proportion and then when you start animating it like poses, like some of our characters are really weird, like
it's a lie.
Stands. Yeah, and it doesn't fit like the feeling of your skin. Like if it's supposed to be a sweet look, but the characters in game is like about like pound your face, and you're just like, I don't know if this is gonna work out. So it really helps if you just go and at least pick like existing skin, because sometimes we use the existing skin as well as a base instead of the default model.
So I have a question, and I'm not entirely sure how it pertains to everybody on the panel. I would hope definitely in some ways it does. But the lore in SMITE, how difficult would it be for, I don't know if it's just cinematics or if it involves everybody, how difficult would it be to animate some of the sections from even the past, from this Odyssey's lore to the Battle of Olympus to all that? Because I mean, the art and story that is already placed in there is absolutely amazing. And to see that animated, kind of like how they did for like the chalk, where Ares going around had like that tiny little, you know, like partial animation kind of thing where it wasn't fully animated, but it was story worked, kind of really, really nice. How difficult would that be to animate it, kind of like with the Bologna Sun Wukong fight that we see always for the SPL?
Whoa, okay. Yeah, that was done by a whole different company. I think Digic did that. That is a whole different set of skills. Like even just like the rendering stuff, like what you saw for just the model, the concept would stay the same basically, because you just already have the models, right, that are the designs for the characters that exist. But when I was going over the modeling side, you have a high poly to a low poly, right? So that low poly mesh is like 7500K tries basically. So the thing is, there was a version that was the high poly that you had, right? Like those, they're gonna animate those models, right? So they'll still get them down to not like maybe millions and millions, but they're gonna be like 200,000, you know, maybe, right? So also the way that you add like materials and texture work for that, maybe the texture maps are a pretty similar workflow, but the materials, it's like a whole different thing, man. Like there's like, you're using a 3D program and using their proprietary material stuff usually, unless you have some rendering engine. There's like different render things you'd have to get as well, so you'd have to have a rendering specialist. I mean, I think what you guys do in cinematics that's kind of part of it, but they leverage what we have in the low poly because you don't have to rebuild anything. So for us to do something like that Sun Wukong fight, like, I'm with you, man. That shit will be dope. But the resources, we just don't have that, I think. I mean, you want to speak more on that?
Yeah, that was made by like you said, it was a totally different studio, and they also had like a huge budget for that, and our budget's a lot smaller. But we are like we're pushing ourselves to, I don't know if you saw the Heimdallr cinematic. That was our newest one, and the whole team was like really stoked about it. They put their hearts into it. So we're definitely pushing ourselves because that's the goal, is to make more videos like that. And the video you're talking about, that was a MoGraph where we had like static paintings and then we put them in the After Effects. That was also outsourced, but I did the storyboards for those. But that's the goal, is to be able to do more stories like that in the future. But right now we're constrained to our budget. We're pushing it a little. We're taking a step forward with each video. And, you know, in the future, maybe we'll do big things like that. I think that would be really, really cool.
And a nice thing, too, to Anna's point, is that as we get more, like, we haven't done a lot of these cinematic things on our own. We got a whole department now, and, like, we have, like, talented people working over there. So the more we do of that, the more we learn about how to do it better from our side, because we are sharing resources. So we're going to, you know, we'll try to be like, okay, let's give you a more higher fidelity version of the character that's more like, you know, facial geometry, more bones from Tim's team or whatever, to make it so that it supports their side of the thing, but then we prune that back for the in-game asset. So we may have like an intermediate asset that's kind of like a lot more involved for what they're doing on the cinematic side to help kind of get there. But getting that level to Sun Wukong fight, that's like, they probably have like 100 people working there, and like it's a huge team, and it's like, I don't know how, it's definitely millions of dollars for the budget for that, absolutely.
Our team it was much smaller. We have 2 animators. I'm the only storyboard artist. We have like 1 effects artist. So our team is a lot smaller too. But it's getting bigger, and sometimes we do outsource, like for the horse and set animation, that we outsourced a couple animators to help us with that fight scene, because there were so many different shots in that. So we definitely get outside help sometimes, but yeah, we're much smaller. But yeah, like I said, taking 1 step at a time.
And if you guys like that helps us, right? Like, so like we could tell our bosses, like, yo, people love this stuff, like they'll invest more into it, and then we'll be able to do more cool stuff. So
exactly.
Keep saying awesome things.
Yep.
He's committed.
For the new Joust map, are you guys at all part of that? Do you guys, what went into kind of redesigning it to kind of going from between the Joust and the classic Joust?
So there's like one fatal flaw to this panel, talking about the artist SMITE, and there's no environment artist here. So we just, they're all pretty booked time-wise. Our art team for the project is about, like, I think we have 4 environment artists and 1 concept artist now. Basically the rules that go into the Joust stuff is, like, obviously gameplay is first, always, right? So we'll take what existed before and then try to, like, add a couple new extra little bit of hooks, maybe add like a camp or something like that that changes the gameplay a little bit, but then just kind of repurpose the art into a way that feels, you know, take what you can that makes sense from the set, and then make new stuff to make it more compelling and interesting. So as far as what changed on it, you'll have to find out pretty soon. You know, we're gonna go over most of this stuff, I think, in the next couple of months. But it's Joust, but with some extra little hooks to it, I think, and it has, I don't know how much I can say. Yeah, we you know, we're making updates. We're making updates, and it's gonna look fresh and new, and there'll be some gameplay stuff. But she's the head of our HR, and she's like, don't you effing talk, dude. Oh, I'm sorry, they're watching me, dude. Meet me after. Slip me a 20, I'll tell you.
Have y'all thought about concept in Morgan skins? Has there been? You don't have to spill all the
Can you say one more time? What kind of skins?
Morgan concept skins.
The
Any
Morgan?
more of those?
Are we allowed to say anything?
More Morgan skins?
I think that's already.
So there's a lot of things that go into why we skin certain characters. There's appeal, there's difficulty levels, there's things that are just like, does it make sense to do this? are they played a lot is a big thing, right? Like if people don't play the character, it's like, you know, this game is a free-to-play game, and that's how we keep everyone making new stuff, is we have to like make money. So if like no one's playing a certain character, they're probably gonna have a less chance of like getting skins for them. To that point, though, we do want to make sure we make people feel excited about the game, and people that don't get to play characters that are maybe less skinned do get some stuff every now and then. Like Jean Kui took him a hot minute, you know, but we're gonna get him some stuff at some point, right? Morgan's really tricky because of how she's built. There's a lot of things that are like limitations on her end, but we definitely know people want Morgan skins, and we are definitely looking into a skin soonish. Okay, probably next year. I know that a big thing we're trying to do is we're looking at characters that haven't gotten skins in a while. It's not just about the popular ones. We want to make sure anyone that hasn't had something since like a 2018 mark, we go back, yeah, and spread the love and make sure people that play these characters get good skins as well. So hopefully soon.
Okay.
Maybe in a battle pass at some point in the future that I didn't say.
What's the hardest skin you guys have done you can think of?
Oh shit, that's gonna be different for everybody here.
Oh, man.
Do you guys want to?
That's really hard to think, because like, for a concept, for me anyway, gosh, I don't know, like the hardest one. Sorry, I'm like,
She makes so many of these, so it's
yeah,
like
it is.
everything's difficult. Because like, what's difficult, right? Is it like your bone limitations? Like how many like extra like? Because the thing is like for her side, she's gonna be limited on what she can add to a skin because we're at 75 bones already. So now we can't add any more, right?
well,
Or
I
is
mean,
it like is there a unique aesthetic to it that you want to try? Right?
well, like for me, I think what's really hard is if it's a subject matter I am not totally familiar with, because I think I actually enjoy like when the bones are difficult, like trying to figure out like a new silhouette or like something completely different. Because I really like it when T3s look like T4s. Because I also played a game and I really like when my character is like really different. I just feel like it's really cool and it's like a fantasy. I'm like, I want to be a sci-fi Nox or whatever. But for me, like if it's a topic that I'm not familiar with, I spend more time like trying to figure out what this topic is like. What's generally like the style trend for it, like currently, or is it a retro skin that we're trying to hit that's kind of like the old games or something? Like I would have to look into that. And if it's like, I guess like personally, sci-fi is kind of like my weak point at this moment, because I really, really love fashion. I like fantasy things like so much. So, so if it's a male character who is sci-fi, it's usually not like my go-to. So like if it gets assigned to me, I'm like, I'm really excited to learn new things, but at the same time, I'm really scared of like what is going to come out looking like and how the community is going to think. I know I shouldn't care like as much as I do, but like I do want the community to really like what I make. So like that kind of makes it difficult. Yeah.
Her ego's on the line.
Huh?
So your ego's on the line.
Well, not the ego. I just want people to like, you know, have a good time with what they might have to pay for. Because especially like if it's a battle pass or like a thing where you have to buy X amount of skin to get something, I really want like the player to get something that they're like, yeah, you know, I played that. It might not be my #1 choice, but you know, I don't feel like I regret my purchases.
You have any?
Oh. There's like two different kinds. Complexity-wise, I'd say it was like Galaxy Shaper Nox, because there was just like a lot to it. But kind of like, I guess on like a personal level, I struggle with like stylized things. So that Phoenix Raw or whatever it was, where they wanted this like really stylized fire, that wasn't my cup of tea. But I learned, you know, it's all good. So.
I'll go really quick, Brock. I don't make stuff anymore, really. I just look at all the awesome stuff everyone else makes. I think it just comes down to kind of like what your skill sets are, like everyone's saying, and what your weaknesses are. But I don't think anything comes off as like challenging is one thing and not fun is another thing. Challenges usually are good things. They just kind of mean you get to try something you haven't done yet, and you can kind of get better at it. I'd say probably the ones that suck for the modeling team are the technical ones that make it more challenging. Cerberus is one. He's really hard because of the way you have to build his heads and stuff like that. There's a very specific way we do that. Yorm is another one that's very difficult. And older characters. I'll say older characters, like Ares, like old Ares. Have you guys seen that dude's hands? Like, all right, don't tell nobody about this. I'm just saying, if you look at his hands, his forearm is like this long, right? But his hands stop right here. It is the most interesting looking character we have in the game. If I do an old Ares skin, that's a difficult challenge for me as an artist.
I should ask something about old characters. Any character that doesn't have a lot of bones are a pain in the butt because there's nothing you can work with. And if you put a short skirt on them, which is usually the limit, to be like right below your pelvis because there is no bones to have skirt, it looks not great. And usually, like, if a T4 comes up, like, the first thing we do is, like, let's give him an outfit, like, please add some tabards or anything, like, so we can use, again, like, and give him, like, different outfits. Like, Neith is a really good example. That's why, like, most of her skins look kind of similar. It's because she doesn't have a whole lot of bones to work with. And Souls is another example. Souls kind of, like, all she has is hair. So if possible, we'll say, like, can we trade some bones, please, rigging? Like,
which we did, actually. Didn't we just have one where she had big
finally.
hair reduction?
Yeah. But usually that's what happens. Like, older characters kind of have limitations because of that, unless they get a remodel.
Yeah, I know a big thing for the rigging team is naturally when we work on tier 5s, there's, you know, they have stages that they evolve through, which is like 1 to 4 different meshes. So I worked on the tier 5 Bologna, and she was really intense because she has the 3 different stages, but she also has a different weapon for each stage. So now you're building, you know, the goal is to have all of those skins right on the same biped, right, the same rig, which I think in this case she actually did, so that was really nice. But for example, the tier 5 Ares, he's comprised of 2 different rigs. So that just adds a whole other level of complexity to what we have going on. And like Ben was saying, with older skins, I worked on the last Zhong skin that we did, the Boogeyman one, and that rig file was a nightmare, literally. It was terrible. So whenever we run into older skins, it's not up to date with how our pipe works anymore. So trying to patch it up and slap Band-Aids all over the place to make it work is probably one of the more challenging things that we deal with from a rigging standpoint.
I'm going to go off that and say for animation, working on tier 5s is a lot of work. It's not that's difficult, it's just a lot more work. Because, for example, Kukulkan, we had to make 3 different animation sets. That was basically like 3 gods. And for Baron, we took his base set for the first 2, and we reworked them to make them like less like he's not snapping around anymore. He's more of a bounty hunter. So for our animation side, that's a lot of work, but I will say that the worst skin I ever worked on was Hell, and she had the Angel Demon skin, and I had to work on her death, and her death, because she has wings for the skin, she like lies on the ground and like freaks out, and while she's doing that, she's switching back and forth between light and dark, so I had to work on which wings, when they touch the ground or like anything touches the ground, it's very difficult because there's no way to like pin it or like make it slide. Like you have to go in frame by frame and try to like make it look realistic or believable. And so I spent like 2 days on the light version, and then I realized that the wings for the dark version are completely different. So I couldn't copy the animation that I had. I had to go and merge both of them in the same file and like try to like match them so when they switch back and forth it wouldn't like bug out. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
What is your guys' favorite skin to use in game?
Favorite skin to use in game?
Depends on the character, right?
Yeah, your favorite god, and then there's favorite skin.
The Ice Dragon Kukulkan is one of my favorite. I win the most with that because I think it's because the sound timing, like I've got it down perfect, so I can like win better. And also the new Nox skin with a big moon.
Sick. Yeah.
That one also has been very kind to me, and also the Southern Belle Nox is also kind to me. And none of them are mine.
I'm a big fan of the Poseidon skin because it's hilarious. I like the silly, goofy skins. Thanatos, come on, it's awesome.
I think I like the Kukulkan, the T5 one. I like just the range of stuff there. I'm into like kind of a little Final Fantasy stuff and all that kind of. I feel like that hits a nice range of things.
I'm a big Morgan Soothsayer. Her effects on that skin are amazing, so I play that one a lot.
That's a good skin. I still like Galaxy Shaver Nox. It's fun. It feels good to use.
Okay, I think we have time for like one or two more short questions. Did you have one?
I was wondering how difficult it is to find space for new gods that might be similar to ones that already exist. Like, if you guys were going to build out another big, beefy one that slaps things with a big stick, you've got Hercules, Kumba, Ymir, you've got these guys, and they all feel very, very different, but it's got to be tough as that space narrows to put another big, beefy guy that hits things with a big stick, and it seems like the whole, even from, like, conceptual all the way through rigging, the way they move, the way their footfalls feel different. How difficult is it to find that different?
Well, for a concept, it will have to start with like the design team, like what the goal is for this god. Usually they actually start trying to figure out like how can we make it different because we have like 100-something gods and like I don't know how many skins, thousands of skins
It's
probably.
Like, yeah, it's like 800.
Yeah, something crazy.
Yeah.
So when they have that, they usually give us some hints like what they'd like to see that might help. And then concept will take that, and also for us, we take existing similar characters and we turn it all black. Just look at the silhouettes. Because in game, a lot of times what you see is the silhouette coming at you, not exactly like the god. So we do that and try to break the silhouette in a meaningful way that still stay true to the lore as well as gameplay. And that also depends on like what class it would be, like guardian or is it like a warrior and things like that. And then we'll actually look at it within that column of like all the warriors, all the beefy ones, like what kind of similarity they have, what they don't have, and what might be cool to have, and things like that, and make sure we don't break the game also.
Yeah, everything Viv just said, we look for like things that we're lacking. And sometimes, say you get Horus and Set, and then there's Ra. It's like, that was the big question, like how do we make him not feel like Ra? Like he's a bird dude, he has a bird head, this dude has a bird head, like what do you do, you know? So the wings are a way to kind of make, and his attacks were the huge way. Like, so like basically, you know, we're like, okay, what new can we do? What new hook can we give this character that makes him feel lore accurate, but also separates him from the other guy that looks just like, it's like his twin brother over here, right? So we'll look for those kind of things, and design's very much aware, like they'll even look for their abilities to try to make sure they're very different. So clarity-wise, you can tell. I think Yemojis, they were talking about having her maybe ride water, and it was kind of like, is that too close to a Hebo kind of vibe? We're not sure, so we decided not to go too much with that. I think she like walks in waters in the ground with her, but yeah, we try to look for that on everybody. Like, how do we make sure that the kits feel different, even if they have the same kind of like vibe and theme?
Yeah, going off that animation, we do a lot of like, we check our stuff a lot. Like if we're having a review and like we, like Hera walks, Yemoja walks, we kind of like see those and we're like, okay, is this similar to Hera? How do we change that? And a lot of like emotes and stuff. Like you can only do a taunt so many ways. So like having a character like draw a line across the sand, like I'm pretty sure a couple do that. Like if we see that, we try to like nix it right there and come up with a more creative solution. So that's part of like the fun of it, I guess.
One thing we'll visually do once we get things in 3D is we'll actually do a lineup of similar gods. So for example, like the Hercules, the Kumba. So if we're trying to make another god that's similar to that, we'll actually put those guys into a 3D scene and load all of their models in there and have them set up in a pose and then also in like an idle comm animation pose. That way we can start to see differences and similarities in silhouette or height or, you know, stockiness, like what kind of build they're going to generally have. And that gives us a quick visual of what's the same and what's not. And then we can kind of push it a little further from there as well.
I just wanted to add in that cinematics also after like the gods have gone through, like have been made and stuff, when the brand manager and marketing comes to us about videos, they will also be very specific. Like for example, Heimdall, they're very like specific about like, hey, don't make him like Uller, because Uller also has axes and stuff. So we had to be very conscious about like when writing the script and doing the storyboards, not making him similar to Uller at all.
And you have one?
Yeah. And I'll ask them both, but if you can only answer one, it's fine. Outside of the legal stuff, the Ravana skin that was pulled, how did that? I'm curious how that affected like the team, or like what kind of maybe ideas you had to get around it. You know, maybe change certain things about it.
You talking about the yellow and black
Yes.
outfit? I'm the one that made that, and it lost the company so much money. And yeah.
So, but it wasn't like a quick fix, right? You mixed it and you're just like.
That thing was like, so we had it and we're like, can we leverage this for anything else? Like, I don't really know. So we just get rid of it for a hot minute. I think we were able to rework it into, I think Ravana. Yeah. So we were able to repurpose it in certain ways. We had to change a lot of it so it didn't feel right, but that was.
Because that's the only one to date that's been.
Yeah. No, there was one more. There was a.
Or there's a Bastet where she was a cat and.
No, I'm gonna talk about this. This is funny. Okay. How much do I got? A couple minutes. Okay. So you know what Infinite Crisis was, from Turbine? It was a DC MOBA game. Okay. Don't leave the room. That's going to be on. So this skin was made by a guy who got hired from that team, right? There was a Bastet like kind of. It was just like a. It's not Catwoman, but it's a woman cat skin, you know? Like, she's just like cosplaying. She's, pretty kitty Bastet. I don't know, right? So they have some similarities. Well, it just so happens to be that there's a character artist that came down from Turbine, worked on that skin, and he literally worked on the Catwoman from that skin on the game from Turbine, which Warner Brothers is in charge of, right? So Warner Brothers hit us with the cease and desist, and the person that told on this skin is a guy that works at our studio right now as a concept artist before he came to Hi-Rez. Yeah. God damn it. So we changed that to Secret Agent Bastet, right? And she looks great. So we try to be smart, right? Like, because I think it's a good skin. There's a lot of work that went into it. So how do we kind of like make it, we reflow it into another kind of look, but we don't like just make it look like we just repainted it with a new, coat and ship it out the door, right? Yeah. They're painful when that happens, and it's like, I think Viv, you pointed out earlier, like people, when they're trying to come up with new skins and stuff, like you're going to be inspired by culture stuff, and the intention is never to be like, yep, we're just going to rip this off. It's like we're just making something we think is cool and is into pop culture, and people also think the same way, right? So a lot of times you'll see games like coming out that like have the same characters at the same times, and it's totally stream of consciousness. But it definitely sucks when it happens.
Playing off of that, a lot of games that are similar to what we make, a lot of people will be like, oh, well, you're just copying Overwatch or something like that. I kind of like to look at it from a different perspective. I think it's nice that we can provide skins that look similar to other games that people enjoy playing, because then they can be in our game playing a skin that is based off of a genre that they really like, or a character that's similar to another character in a game that they also like to play, right? So we never have the intention of, like Ben said, just copying and pasting something. We like to make skins based off of things that our community enjoys playing. So it's a nice, it's nice to have that.
The whole goal for skins, like, we want you guys to play as stuff you like. Like, it has nothing to do with us.
Right.
We're just like, all right, what they want to do,
Right.
and they just ask and poll and do data and try to figure out, and we just say, okay, from there, what can we make that we think people would like? So I agree with you. I like pop culture reference stuff. That's the way I like to say it, right? Where it's like safe, but it's obviously your own spin on that.
I agree with Tim and Ben on this. And also in the world, like literally everything is influenced by everything. Like clothing we're wearing, they're influenced by like video games too nowadays. And video games like to look at the real world. We're trying to put it in the game so that it's believable and it's a fantasy. And you can be a supermodel if you want to, or you can be a superhero if you want to. So I think like sometimes people will see something and it reminds them of something, and they immediately go there and go, oh, that's like X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, if you really sit down and look at it and compare it, it's not the same. So, but I think it's kind of nice. Like what Ben was saying, like, yeah, I would totally wear, well, I will wear something too, but like, I would play a skin